So today we're going to be taking a look at the Emperor card and really diving into the meaning of this card, where that meaning comes from. And this card has a lot of different aspects to it. It's a multifaceted card that really does give us a lot of things to think about. I think that depending on the other cards in the reading, depending on the situation, depending on the people in your life, this card can take on a lot of different forms. And when we really sit with it and work with it, it can tell us a lot about ourselves as well and where we're at. So let's just jump into some of the symbols on the card. The first symbol that I want to talk about and really look at is the one that jumps out to me, which are the ram's heads that are on the throne. And those ram's heads, of course, are associated with the sign of Aries. This card is connected to that fire energy of that. And I think that's very fitting. There's a lot of red on this card, and we'll be looking both at the Thoth system and at the RWS system. And you can see that in both cases, there's a huge amount of red. So red is a symbol of fire, but it's also a symbol of authority and power. Because it's Aries, it's also connected to Mars, and therefore it is connected to the Tower. So there is that relationship between the Tower and the Emperor card of one of being establishing a foundation, and then another one of breaking down a foundation. So when you think about that, that's very fitting, because on the zodiac, Aries is the first card in the zodiac. Actually, not the first card, the first sign of the zodiac. So that means that Aries is an initiation sign or a creative sign. And so you also have the ending of that cycle, because of course the zodiac goes in a circle. So you have that connection between beginning and end, foundation and destruction, but all for a purpose of enhancing your life. The destructive side of Aries can often be a side of dominance and overbearing. And that's something that we'll address in just a moment. But again, like I said, there's different ways of looking at it. So the foundational side of Aries, you can see that on a lot of cards because they'll have a lot of squares and rectangles and straight lines. And it's connected to the number 4. Number 4 is also the 4th month, so that's also Aries. But the number 4 is the number 4 is a number of stability. So when we usually hear phrases that have the number 4, sometimes it'll be a phrase that often implies this, like feet planted squarely on the ground, or we'll have something like starting from square 1, 4 square meals, square something away. So you have this organizational side to it, and a side of really making something, setting something up so that it benefits you in the future. So again, when you get into reading, think about those things. Think about what those foundations in your life are. And it also has strong implications of just being in the physical world, experiencing this 3D experience. And so this is the first time that we really get that solid, full immersion of being in 3D. So we have the cube. So cubes are 3-dimensional. And of course, on the Fountain Tarot here, you have the Emperor inside of that cube, kind of setting things up, managing things within it, and really working around the cube to really establish it in space. And that foundation, I think, is really emphasized in the Science Tarot. We have the crystals. So it says crystallization. And crystals are formed because of the stability and patterns inherent in the crystal. So you have, according to Coulomb's law, crystals will set themselves up, or actually atoms will set themselves up inside of crystals to maximize the distance between repulsive and attractive forces. So you want your opposite forces to be attracted, and the negative forces or positive forces that are near each other to be far away enough to maximize or optimize the stability of the crystal. And so that's why they have these certain patterns depending on the size of the atoms and the arrangement of the atoms in the compounds, whether you have 2 or 3 atoms that are bonded together, or however many atoms are in that compound, whether it's polyatomic or just an ion, it can be arranged in certain ways. So continuing with the concept of being in the physical world, we also have space and time. So the Emperor on the Physics Tarot addresses that aspect of it. And Einstein said that space and time are a persistent illusion. And I can agree with that. I think that it is, you think about going faster than the speed of light and how time breaks down, space takes on a different meaning when you get past that threshold. and how that's a very strong limitation to our physical existence. And so one of the aspects, though, that I really want to talk about when it comes to space and time is our ability to reflect and create different pathways through that space and time as we analyze our situations. It's sort of an intervention to open up more opportunities, and to also look at your present situation and think about the pathway that leads you on. So I love on the 78 Tarot Ecological how it has this dragon and it says Father Time at the bottom. And when you look through this portal that he's presenting to you, you see the future. You see that there's a city that's in ruins, and that is really giving you the option to make a choice. And I really love on the Hermetic Tarot how it takes this a step further. I love how he has a bee down here and he has his foot on the bee, which is a symbol of him having the power over organizing his life. And if you look at the back, you can see all of these different spheres. And what that reminds me of is the multiverse. It reminds me of how scientists are researching the multiverse and how there are different timelines and shifts and things that we can go into. That whole concept, I think, is fascinating to me, because the more you actually delve into your authority over that, the more options you have. And the more you believe in that, the more options you have, the more things open up and allow you to venture in new ways. So I love that card. I love how it takes you further and further back, and it's like it's an infinite amount of possibilities there. There's also a very significant connection between the Emperor and the Empress. And I love how the Thoth Tarot really does show us this connection. First of all, the way they're looking at each other. I find that this, out of a lot of different decks do this, but this deck in particular really does show that connection well. But another way that they're connected is alchemically. So there's this alchemical connection between them. And then as you mix both of their energies, you're able to manifest. And so what I mean by that is, if you look at the Empress, she is forming the shape of a circle with a line through it. And that is the symbol for salt. And then the Emperor is forming the symbol for sulfur. So I'll outline these, I'll put them up here and I'll outline those images so that you can see what I'm talking about there. So salt is associated with earth, and then sulfur is associated with fire. So if you look at the Emperor's shield, he also has a image that represents alchemy on it. He has the red and white tincture, which represent the power of the Emperor and the power of the Empress mixed together to really form that combination that works well. So let's switch here and let's talk about some aspects of the Emperor card that can be a bit more challenging. So on this card here from the Carnival at the End of the World, you have the Emperor there, and he's standing on, well, first of all, he's in this suit. He's a businessman, and he's standing on all of these elephant tusks. So to me, this is, I guess, symbolic of kind of corporate greed or greed in general, and really not valuing the existence of others in order to get what you want. And I think that is the challenging part of the Emperor card. That is the challenging part, because that is where the arrogance and the greed really do come into play. So this right here, I think, is a tragedy. So when anytime there's this destruction of life, that's where you have the major breakdown with power. And on the Lorenzi Tarot, you have this pig, and then you have these people that are these puppets down at the bottom, and they're being controlled by this overbearing corporate figure. And in the back, you have a city that has all this smoke coming up. So it's in ruins, similar to what was on the 78 Tarot Ecological card, how you have that ruined city in the back. And I find that that is a very difficult thing to see and very challenging. On the Emperor card, on the Tabula Mundi, it really does bring together a lot of these aspects. And so I really love this card for that. It brings together the foundation with the compass and the square. It brings together organization with the beehive here, the connection to Mars with the face of Mars on his knee. And one of the things that really stands out here is the hooks in the background. So those hooks in the background are important because there was a lot of confusion early on about this card and what this card is associated with. And Aleister Crowley made this switch in the Thoth deck. And it's not always like this in other decks, or even for the majority of decks, but in the Thoth system, there was this switch made, and it makes a lot of sense to me because this places this on a different place on the Tree of Life. So there's a deck that I got recently, and I think it's called the Tree of Life Oracle. I forgot the name, but The 28th pathway they have as the star. And traditionally, on most decks, that is where the star is on that pathway. And the 15th pathway, I'll put the tree of life up so you can kind of see what I'm talking about here, is the emperor traditionally. But Aleister Crowley switched those two. So the 28th pathway is the emperor, which is a little bit further down. On other decks, like I said, we have that fish hook. So on the Nameless One Tarot, we also can see that right here, those two fish hooks. And I'm not sure if the artist meant to make that sigil in that way, but I find that really interesting that of all the cards where that fish hook could have been on there, and I looked through a lot of cards, I didn't see it on others, not to this extent. And I found that really interesting, and how that may have just came out intuitively, or maybe it was something that was researched and done intentionally. I'm not sure, but that works. And then there's the ram's head down here at the bottom. So this is a quote from Aleister Crowley, and you can see that he's saying Zadi is not the star. And that is the name of that pathway, pathway 28. But I wanted to point that out because Zadi means fishhook. And so when you see the fishhook on some tarot decks, it could be because they're referring to the switch that Aleister Crowley was talking about. But let's talk a little bit more about these pathways and why they're significant and what that really means about our energy. So if you have the emperor here, as in the Kabbalistic tarot, and not down here, right, as Crowley suggested, it kind of takes it away from being in direct connection with our power. And what I mean by that is if we look at the other things that are connected to that middle Sephiroth before we go up the middle pathway, which is the path of the camel, if we look at that, we can see that there are some other important things that involve our energy connected to that pathway. And for example, the universe, and also we have the sun. And we can also incorporate that into our bodies, but that is our energy. And we have a right to that energy. And if we look at the RWS system, he's holding an Ankh. According to some sources that I found, the Ankh specifically means life force, or it could just mean life, but it also means breath of life. And depending on what you look at, you'll get different translations of what that really means. And Ankhs are symbolic of the circuit of that energy throughout your body. And I talked about this before in other videos. I think that, there are vampiric things that can try to live off of that energy, use that energy. But when you establish that, and as we establish that as a collective, things change. It's not like you're holding your energy and you're being selfish with it. You're just taking control of it and directing it as you will. So the element that I want to talk about that's associated with the Emperor card is beryllium. And of course, beryllium is number 4 in the periodic table. And if you're new to my channel, I like to connect the cards to not just the elements such as earth, fire, air, and water, but also the elements on the periodic table, and sort of perform a little bit of alchemy and see where that goes by mixing these things together. And I find that beryllium really does mix very much with the energy of the Emperor card. And so what we have is we have an element that is used as an alloy. It's often combined with other elements to fortify them and to make them stronger. And they can be used in a lot of applications where it requires a rugged and strong foundation. So things that need to be very robust and able to withstand and endure the test of time. So beryllium is very good in those instances. And it does combine really well with iron, which is associated with Mars. And we talked about that connection with Mars as well. So that's one of the aspects, is a very strong foundational element, but also it's very good at being able to analyze other elements because it's very transparent and allows radiation to pass through it, but it's also very visible and you can see through it and you can have these very thin sheets of it. It's used in these types of boxes that allow us to X-ray things and really analyze the details of different structures of crystals and different compounds and really find out how we can use those things effectively. But on the other side of that, beryllium is also very toxic, and it's known for being like a precursor to pneumonia. You also have to wear very protective clothing when dealing with the dust particles of beryllium. And so that's one of the things that you really have to think about. And then also it does have some negative aspects in terms of being used in weapons of war and missiles and things like that as well. And so it does have those combinations of abuse of power also. And that's something that I find interesting, that it takes on those qualities. It kind of absorbs those qualities into its structure. And then another connection with the Empress card is that it's salt forming. It's called an alkaline earth metal. And so on its own, beryllium is, it's reactive, and it does react with other elements, particularly with the halogens, and forms these salts. But the fact that it has that salt forming component means that it's connected to the element of salt. And so you have that sulfur aspect on its own, but then forming that salt aspect as it works with the energy of the Empress card. And so I find that by these two cards working hand in hand together, they can be very powerful, and they can be a way of really creating something that is not only beneficial to everyone, but also very powerful and really sets you apart and really gives you that power and authority and sovereignty. So that is the information that I wanted to give you about the Emperor card and its connection to a lot of different things, and then also finally with beryllium. And so thank you guys so much for watching. My name is Will. This is Atypical Tarot, and I'll see you next time.